My family refused to help me with my business because they invested in my cousin. But now that he failed and my company succeeds, they call my company the family business. I'm Zakery. I'm 34 years old and I grew up in a family that was, well, comfortable. My father had several businesses spread across the city, real estate, retail, and more. My mother owns multiple buildings. Yes, in plural. My grandparents, while not as wealthy, were the first entrepreneurs in our family who managed to build enough success to give my parents their initial boost. There's this expectation in my family. If you're born into it, you either inherit something and don't ruin it, or you start your own empire. Naturally, I wanted the latter. I wasn't a naive kid dreaming about opening a beach hut in the Bahamas. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I had a plan, a solid one. Ever since I was 14, when I accidentally hacked my school's server to change my detention record, I discovered I had a talent for computers. I went to university, graduated in computer science, and spent hours obsessed with encryption, data breaches, and programming. After graduating, I realized cybersecurity isn't just an interesting career. It's lucrative. Every business needs it. Every bank, every hospital. It's like selling umbrellas in a world where it's always raining data breaches. I had a vision, a potential client base, and a detailed business plan that I thought would impress anyone. But here was the problem. I needed money to start. A lot of it. I wasn't asking for millions, just enough to rent office space, hire a small team, and invest in initial software and hardware. I could have started with less, sure, but I had this very clear picture in my head of what the company would look like. One morning, I approached my parents. We were sitting in the living room and I presented my idea. I had charts, market research, and passion. I asked them for a loan, not a gift, not free money. This was a loan I would pay back with interest once the business took off. They said, "Zach, we love you, but we don't think you have what it takes to run a business." They didn't say it cruelly. My dad sighed as he said it, like it physically hurt him to reject me. My mom gave me one of those pitying looks that moms give when they think you're being adorably naive. My dad explained that being a good programmer doesn't automatically make you a good entrepreneur. Running a business means, well, running it, managing accounts, employees, investors, losses, all those boring, unfun parts. And according to them, I simply didn't have that spark. For them, investing in me wasn't investing. It was throwing money away. I won't lie, that hurt. At first, I was angry, very angry, but I still didn't want to give up on my dream. A month after my parents rejected my funding request, my cousin Bernard was getting married. A big, lavish wedding, 3 days of events, champagne fountains, the whole spectacle. At one point, I was standing with my parents near the buffet table when Bernard approached us. He greeted my parents, shook my dad's hand, and then said, "Uncle, Auntie, thank you again for believing in me and helping me with the funds for my hotel business. I couldn't have done it without you." I stood there staring at Bernard like he had just confessed to being a time traveler. My parents laughed nervously, said something polite, and quickly changed the subject. I had asked for funding. They said no. But Bernard got funding for a hotel. A hotel I left with a lame excuse because I felt betrayed. Not because funding Bernard was wrong, good for him I guess, but because they wouldn't do the same for me. They trusted Bernard, but me, their own son, apparently wasn't worth the risk. At some point, my grandmother found me sitting alone. "Zakery, what are you doing here? Why aren't you inside enjoying the wedding?" There's something about grandmothers. You can't lie to them. You just can't. So I told her everything. She just let me vent. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Zakery, sometimes people see potential in others because they see a version of themselves in them. It's possible your father sees a younger version of himself in Bernard, but that doesn't mean you're not capable. You're different. And being different isn't bad. It's just different." She squeezed my hand and added, "You're smart. You work hard. Someday you're going to build something incredible. It just has to be on your own terms." I know it sounds cliche, but that was exactly what I needed in that moment. The day after the wedding, I was still in this strange emotional fog, half motivated by what my grandmother said, but also half devastated. I was sitting on my couch when my phone rang. It was my grandfather. Now, my grandfather isn't the type to call just to chat, so naturally I panicked. I asked if everything was okay, and he said everything was fine. He just wanted me to come see him. "Okay, Grandpa. I'll be there in 2 hours." When I arrived at his house, my grandmother opened the door with a warm smile. "Come in, Zakery. Your grandfather is in his study." He was sitting in his chair when I entered, but he immediately stood up and hugged me. In that moment, I began to relax a little. My grandfather didn't waste time on small talk. "Your grandmother told me what happened at the wedding and how you're feeling about your business plans." I nodded, trying to keep a neutral expression. He continued, "I want you to know something. I started my first business with nothing but an old van and a loan from my uncle. It wasn't easy, and everyone thought I was going to fail, but I didn't. And you know why?" I shook my head. "Because someone believed in me. Sometimes just one person can make all the difference." Then he reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a checkbook, wrote something, and handed it to me. Now, I won't tell you the exact amount, but let's just say it wasn't pocket change. It wasn't everything I needed to launch my cybersecurity company, but it was enough to start. Enough to make a real difference. I stared at the check for what felt like 5 full minutes. Finally, I managed to say, "Grandpa, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "This isn't just money. It's confidence. I'm investing in you." I tried with all my might not to lose my composure, but my grandfather simply stood up, walked over, hugged me, and said, "Make us proud." On the drive home, I kept looking at the check. It wasn't just money, it was proof that someone believed in me. After getting the initial funding from my grandfather, I knew I had to be smart with every penny. No splurging on fancy desks or modern office chairs. We started small. I reached out to my two best friends, Adam and Luis. We pooled what little we'd saved and rented a tiny, cramped office in the most dangerous part of the city. But hey, it was ours. Those first 2 years were brutal. We worked 14 to 16 hours a day, barely rested on weekends, and survived on instant noodles and vending machine snacks. Luis was on calls nonstop. Adam was buried in code. And me? I did a bit of everything. Our first big client was a mid-sized financial firm that had just been hacked. We managed to repair their systems, recover their data, and prevent future breaches. That project gave us enough money to move to a slightly better office. Little by little, we started gaining traction. Word of mouth began to spread, and we started landing larger clients. About 4 years later, we hit our first major milestone. We had enough revenue to consider expanding. We opened our second office in a nearby city, and a year later, a third in another major city. By then, we were no longer a scrappy startup. We were a real company. Around that time, we also started a cybersecurity consulting firm. It seemed like the next logical step. Companies weren't just asking us to fix breaches. They wanted to prevent them proactively. And let me tell you, consulting money hits different. About 5 years after starting the business, I was finally in a position to pay my grandparents back. I drove to their house, check in hand, and said, "This is yours with interest," but I didn't stop there. These two people had given me everything when no one else did, so I bought them a new house. Nothing ridiculously extravagant, but cozy, comfortable, and in a neighborhood they'd always loved. Watching them walk through their new home, pointing out little details they liked, it was one of the most rewarding moments of my life. As our cybersecurity business thrived, Bernard's Hotel didn't. The pandemic crushed the hospitality industry, and Bernard's Hotel never fully recovered. Apparently, my parents gave him even more money to help, but despite their efforts, and honestly, I feel bad for him, the hotel eventually closed. Last weekend, we were celebrating my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. Because they are literally the reason I have everything I have, I wanted to make sure I continued thanking them for what they did. I spared no expense. I rented a beautiful hotel ballroom, hired a caterer, organized a live band, and invited basically everyone. Friends, family, even some old neighbors they hadn't seen in years. Honestly, planning this event felt more emotional than some of the biggest business deals I've closed. The party was spectacular. Everyone was dressed up. The food was incredible. And my grandparents were so happy. That was what mattered. But then my parents entered the scene. At some point during the night, I overheard my dad talking to one of his old friends. When his friend said he must be proud of me, my dad responded by talking about family values and how his support and guidance had put me on the right path. He also mentioned, "It's practically a family business now." Excuse me, I hadn't misheard. As the night went on, I kept hearing fragments of conversations where my parents painted themselves as the backbone of my success. We always knew he'd do something great. We supported him every step of the way. That's what we do as a family. We lift each other up. And the kicker? My dad said, "It's all thanks to the family's initial support." Look, I'm not saying I needed my parents to kneel before me or apologize with tears in their eyes, but taking credit for something they actively refused to support? That didn't sit well with me at all. I tried to enjoy the rest of the night, but I was really angry. I had originally planned something simple, a heartfelt tribute to my grandparents. But after everything I heard that night, I knew I couldn't let it slide. I started with a light tone, made a few jokes, mentioned how their marriage was older than the internet, talked about the love and respect they'd always shown each other, but then I got serious. Grandma and Grandpa didn't just build a life together, they built a legacy. A legacy of love, trust, and most importantly, faith in people. When I had a dream and everyone else shut the door in my face, they opened it. They didn't just believe in my idea, they believed in me. Everything I have today is because of their faith in me when no one else had it. I paused. My parents were staring at me with frozen smiles on their faces. So tonight, I want to propose a toast to Grandma and Grandpa, the only two people who believed in me when no one else did. This success is theirs, and no one else's. My grandmother was crying. My grandfather nodded with that proud, quiet smile of his. And my parents? They were forced smiling with clenched teeth. About 15 minutes after my speech, my dad found me near the dessert table. He was basically shouting, "What the hell was that speech? Were you trying to humiliate us in front of everyone?" "Humiliate you?" I said. "I just told the truth. You didn't believe in me. But Grandma and Grandpa did." My mom joined in. "You didn't have to air family problems in front of everyone. You made us look terrible." At that point, I was biting my tongue, trying not to explode. But then my dad said, "You act like we didn't do anything for you. We gave you a good life, a good education. How dare you make us out to be the villains in your little success story?" At first I didn't shout, but my voice definitely went up. "You know what? You didn't believe in me. You had the money, but you gave it to Bernard for his hotel without a second thought. And when he failed, you gave him even more. But when I came to you with my idea, you told me I wasn't the business type. I realized the room had gone completely silent. The guests were staring. My cousin Bernard, the one with the failed hotel, was awkwardly sipping his drink in a corner, looking like he wanted to disappear. My dad pointed his finger at me. "You're being ungrateful." And I responded, completely losing control. "Ungrateful? No, I'm not ungrateful. I'm just saying out loud what everyone already knows." My chest felt tight. My face was hot. And I realized I had just caused a scene at what was supposed to be a celebration for my grandparents. I looked around and saw my grandmother looking at me with a soft, sad expression. Not disappointed, just sad. My grandfather had his arm around her, like he was trying to keep her calm. That's when the guilt hit me. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, walked out of the ballroom, and didn't even grab my coat. I got in my car, slammed the door, and sat there for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to calm down. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed the argument over and over in my head. The next morning, I received a text from my grandmother. "Zakery, we love you so much. Please don't feel bad about last night. We understand, but that didn't really make me feel better. I've been thinking a lot about it. I crossed the line. I ruined a night that was supposed to be for my grandparents." Update 1. The fallout. I thought things would calm down after that night. I thought maybe everyone would reflect a little, and then we'd have an adult conversation. But no, my parents decided to go nuclear. It started small. A cousin texted me, "Hey Zach, is it true you manipulated grandma and grandpa into giving you money?" That's what Uncle said. At first I laughed because, come on, it sounded ridiculous. But then the calls kept coming. An aunt messaged me on Facebook saying she was disappointed in how I used my grandparents' emotions to get money out of them. So I called my grandmother immediately. I needed to know she was okay. She said, "Don't worry about what others say. We know the truth." And that's all that matters. Honestly, she's the sweetest woman in the world. And hearing her voice calmed me down a little. But I couldn't ignore the fact that my parents were out there spinning a twisted narrative. I'm not someone who likes confrontation, despite what my anniversary meltdown might suggest. But this time I couldn't let it slide. I called my parents and asked, "What the hell are you telling everyone? Why are people calling me saying I manipulated grandma and grandpa?" My mom responded, "Well, you cried to them. You made them feel sorry for you. That's manipulation." I said I wasn't crying to them. I was telling them about my situation because that's called having emotions. I heard my dad in the background. "You can interpret it however you want, Zakery, but everyone sees you for what you really are." "Fine," I said. "Perfect. Say whatever you want to, everyone. I'm tired of trying to explain myself to you." And I hung up. I thought hanging up would bring some peace, but it didn't. Over the next week, the rumors only got worse. One relative said they heard I threatened to cut off grandma and grandpa if they didn't give me money. Another said I bragged about how I manipulated them and laughed about it afterward. I felt like I was losing my mind. How do you fight something like that? It's so absurd it almost seems comical, except it's not funny when the people you care about start believing it. One day, my cousin Bernard, yes, that cousin, even called me. "Hey man, I know things are complicated right now, but do you think you could talk to Uncle and Auntie and work this out?" I said, "There's nothing to work out, Bernard. They know the truth. They're just choosing to ignore it." I texted my parents, "I can't do this anymore. You've made the decision to spread these lies, and I can't keep trying to convince you otherwise. I'm stepping away from this relationship for now. I love you both, but I can't keep letting this hurt me." And that was it. I blocked them on social media because they were posting passive-aggressive things about me. I stopped responding to relatives who were clearly just looking for gossip. I'm in a strange place right now. If anything happens, I'll keep you posted. Update 2. Loss and inheritance. It's been a while. I wish I could come back with better news, but life doesn't always give you good news. My grandfather passed away last month. The only good thing I can say about it is that he went in his sleep. In a way, it was peaceful. But man, it still hit me like a truck. Needless to say, in this update, I want to emphasize how important he was to me. And I'm not talking about the money. I'm talking about the support and the example he set as a person. As soon as I got the news, I packed a bag and drove straight to my grandmother's house. She looked so small and fragile when I walked in, but she still managed to give me a weak smile and a hug. I don't think I've ever hugged anyone that hard in my life. Organizing the funeral was difficult, but I needed to do it for my grandmother. My parents were also there, and while we were civil, there was this strange tension in the air. Like we all knew there were unresolved issues, but no one had the energy to address them in the middle of grief. The funeral itself was beautiful, honestly. Hundreds of people attended. My grandfather was one of those genuinely good souls, and seeing how many lives he touched was overwhelming. Old business partners, childhood friends, neighbors. People came from everywhere to pay their respects. I tried to stay composed during the eulogy, but man, I lost it halfway through. My grandmother held my hand the entire time, and I'm so grateful she was there because I don't think I could have done it otherwise. Now here's where things got complicated. My grandfather wasn't incredibly wealthy or anything, but he owned some properties, including a beautiful lake house. It's the kind of place you'd see on postcards. A wooden dock, big windows overlooking the water, surrounded by trees. My dad spent a lot of time there as a kid, and even I have memories of running down the dock, fishing with grandpa, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. During the reading of the will, the lawyers began listing the assets. And then we got to the lake house. My grandfather left it to me and my cousin Laura. For context, Laura is my dad's sister's daughter. She's genuinely great, someone I get along with. But the moment my dad heard the words, Zakery and Laura will share ownership of the lake house, I swear I saw his jaw clench. He didn't say anything at the time, but his face said it all. He was furious. Like, really furious. After the reading, he walked out without saying a word to me. My mom followed him, and I just sat there awkwardly with Laura and my grandmother. Over the next few days, while I stayed with my grandmother, my dad completely avoided me. If we were in the same room, he acted like I was invisible. My mom gave me those weird half smiles, but also didn't say much. It's incredible to me because it's not like I asked for the lake house. I didn't even know Grandpa was going to leave it to me. But somehow I felt like my dad saw it as another personal attack, like Grandpa was taking my side in some imaginary war. Laura and I talked about it one night over tea. She admitted she felt uncomfortable too, because her mom, my dad's sister, wasn't exactly happy with the will either. But at least Laura's mom wasn't acting coldly toward her. One afternoon, while I was helping my grandmother organize some of Grandpa's old things, she sat down with me and said, "Your grandfather loved your father very much, Zakery, but he also saw how hard you worked, how much you struggled to prove yourself. He wanted you to have something that meant a lot to him." I think she knew I felt guilty about the whole situation, like I had accidentally caused an even bigger rift between my dad and me. But my grandmother said something that stuck with me. Your grandfather wasn't taking sides. He was choosing love. He loved you, and he loved Laura. That's why he wanted you both to have a place where you could always feel close to him. The night before I went back home, I ran into my dad in the kitchen. He was making tea and I was filling a glass with water. For a moment, there was silence. Neither of us said anything, but then he spoke. "You know, that lake house was supposed to stay in the family. It was supposed to be ours," I replied. "It still is, Dad. I'm not selling it. I'm not turning it into a rental property. It's still ours." He didn't respond. He just stirred his tea, put down the spoon, and walked out. Update 3, the lawsuit. There are some things I need to address now because my father has decided to sue me. He believes the lake house belongs to him, despite the fact that my grandfather left it to me and my cousin Laura. I can't talk much about the details because everything is very complicated and legally messy, but I'll try to give you an idea of what's happening. It all started when my dad began showing up at my house unannounced, demanding that I hand over the lake house. At first I thought maybe he was just upset and wanted to talk, but when I refused to back down, he started making threats. He told me Grandpa's will was wrong and that I was wrong for not sharing the house with him. It was like a switch had flipped in him. Then came the legal documents. I won't go into details, but basically, my dad's legal team sent me official documents accusing me of obtaining the lake house improperly and demanding that I hand it over. He claims it's his inheritance, not mine, and that I manipulated my grandfather into leaving it to me. It's ridiculous. My grandfather clearly left the house to Laura and me. My mom is still trying to mediate, trying to convince me to give in and just hand the house over to my dad so we can move past this. But I'm at a point where I don't think there's any going back. I don't think we can ever repair what's broken. I don't think I'll have another post for a while, at least until everything settles down and I can give you more details. Update 4, resolution. This update comes a long time after the last one, and believe me, I wish it had come sooner, because that would have meant the lawsuit with my father had ended earlier, but it didn't. Not until now, which is when I can finally speak freely about everything that happened. Well, my father couldn't invalidate my grandfather's will and get the house, which would have been perfect for him, as I'll explain later. The lawsuit should have been fairly short, really, but my father had good lawyers, at least when it came to delaying things, and it dragged on longer than usual. I think he was hoping I'd eventually throw in the towel and tell him the house would be his, something I couldn't have done anyway, because it also belongs to my cousin. But even my aunt didn't join my father's crusade. And when my grandmother told me that my grandfather really wanted me to have it, I couldn't back down. Fortunately, my grandmother's testimony was useful in court, since my father had absolutely nothing at all. The only thing he accomplished was spending an impressive amount of money on lawyers that he didn't have. But he also made me spend a lot too. But if there's one good thing that came from everything he did, it's that, in addition to spreading his rhetoric about me manipulating my grandfather to the family, he also expanded it to more people, to the point where it was affecting my business, so we played a game of chess and sued him for defamation and for compensatory damages. Don't know the value of the house. My grandfather left us because we haven't had it appraised. We don't want to sell it. But I'm sure that what he lost in legal fees and what he had to pay for my lawsuit, which I won, was much more costly. Yes, we're talking about that kind of money. And this is particularly bad for my father because part of his obsession with my grandfather grandfather's house wasn't about memories. He wanted to make money from it. He planned to get it and sell it. My grandfather's body wasn't even cold yet, and he was already arguing about the inheritance because he needed the money. The reason for this is that the money he lent my cousin, along with subsequent loans, left him in a precarious financial position, and his fight with me only made it worse. Though he can't blame anyone but himself, he brought it on himself. He could have used the money he spent on lawyers to pay off his debt and still have some financial stability. My parents have had to sell their house. Some of the money went to paying off my lawsuit, and the rest went toward covering other debts. They've been really hit hard financially by that bad investment. They still have my father's business, which as far as I know is profitable. However, he's been looking to sell part of it to alleviate some of his debts. Someone in the family suggested I buy it so the business stays in the family. But being partners with my father isn't one of the most tempting ideas right now. Besides, it's not an industry I enjoy or one where I can contribute much with my expertise. At least I know my father won't have money to keep suing over anything else that comes to mind. Edit. My father sold part of his company to a family member. I think some of you who asked about that might find this interesting. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more where this came from.